I can do that. So you'll be aware that we were looking to do a council field trip this afternoon. So that was a combination of a visit to the Puketapu gauging station from a health and safety perspective, and then on to Chester Hope Station, which is the proposed site for the new Cranford Hospice. So we've combined those in the same afternoon, and a bus is booked, and some people have said yes, and some people are unable to make it or have yet to respond. I am aware, though, that today the rain is meant to come upon us quite significantly, so we may have to make a call of whether we proceed with the visit on that basis, or you want to defer it to another day.
Well, we need the rain.
I'm not arguing about that.
I'm happy to defer it to another day. I prefer it, actually.
You prefer it? We'll perhaps have a show of hands for defer.
I don't think we should defer. Let's see if it rains or not.
Well, we can make the call nearer the time. The bus is booked, so if we go ahead, we can carry on. But if at lunchtime the heavens have opened significantly, you might make a different call. The team will still be going. It's a normal working day for them, so they'll still be out at the stream doing their work. It's just a question of whether you wish to go.
Can someone let me know what's the value of us going to visit the proposed site for the Cranford Hospice?
So you'll recall that last year we had a presentation from the Cranford Hospice about their development plans, and they did indicate that they would be coming to all councils in the region looking for financial support.
It was in the previous term.
Yeah.
I was chairing the
I thought
CNS
it was
committee
last
meeting.
year.
No, it was last year. It's part of the...
Well, they have come twice.
They've come twice.
Yes.
They've come twice.
And look, there's been no financial commitment indicated to them that would be forthcoming from the council, but they said, notwithstanding that, they're still interested in us understanding what their development plans are, and they have indicated that there is some riparian work on the property that they're interested in doing that we may be able to assist with at the very, very least. So it was an opportunity to understand how this regionally significant project is going to go forward, and then at some future date the council might decide on providing some support in some way or not.
Do we offer the same opportunity to every organisation that comes in and wants funding from us?
No, I think this is probably in recognition of the significance of this region in terms of this proposition. This is a very big undertaking that they are taking on, and will be a very, very significant community investment.
All right, well, look, I think we've got a steer, haven't we, Joe? That we'll leave it in abeyance for an hour or two.
Yeah.
See how we go, and either choose a bus, a car, or a push bike to go, depending on numbers.
Yes.
We do have 2 electric bikes out there.
Yeah.
Go.
Look, I will start the meeting, but the pre-meeting's over. So, Buddy, can you help us, please, open?
Kia ora rea, Chair. E a kuna rangatira tēnā koutou katoa. Ai te tuatahi ka tau mai ngā mihi kia rātou kua haere takahia I tērā te arawhānui e tāne ki te wāhi o kore hoki mai. Some of us who went to the Māori committee out in Wairau yesterday would have noticed the busyness of some of our marae en route. So Tangoio, we have a mate on Tangoio. Just recently I noticed Michael's just walked out. But also the Paku whānau. There are many who this time are actually grieving across our district, and it's always good to remember them. And for those of us who carry any grievance or heaviness in terms of our current precedent on this committee, then our condolences and our sympathy to each and every one of you. Hoi anō rātou kua mihia, kua tangihia. Just in terms of this afternoon, I think with our combined effort and our karakia, we might be able to make it rain more or to hasten some of that rain. So if you'd like to join me with the karakia, and I'll go through the one that we've used often. I have a personal agenda or performance target that someone around this table in time will lead this rather than myself. So I'll work individually on each and every one.
That's a great KPI.
It is. Yeah. You could help me with it. We'll go slowly. Whakataka te hau ki te uru. Whakataka te hau ki te tonga. Kia mā kina ki utara. Kia mā taratara ki taia. E hi ake ana, e ata e teo, he huka, he hau, ti hei mau. Cease the winds from the west, cease the winds from the south. Let the breeze blow over the land, let the breeze blow over the ocean. Let the red tipped dawn come with a sharpened ear, a touch of frost, a promise of a glorious day. E te tia mana tēnā.
Yeah, kia ora, thank you.
No, there's nothing about rain in there.
So, councillors, Mr Paku, Mr Waka, welcome. Just to set the order of the day, I understand Hamish is here from Expo Tourism. Is this your first visit to us here? So welcome, and you're the acting role there. I had you down for 10 a.m, but we might shunt you up the batting order based on how we progress. So you're able to get on with your day, unless you want to stay and be educated around this committee's very wise considerations. We have at 11 a.m. a visit from Business Hawke's Bay. Carolyn Neville, I think, is going to be speaking to us there at that time. And then we've got, you would have received a late paper, the Treasury Report. Did everyone get a copy of the Treasury Report? I hope they did. Yeah. And we've got two parties, both Mercer and First New Zealand Capital here. Do we know what time?
They're both coming around 10. I just
Around 10?
I've said that they can have 10 minutes each.
10 minutes each at 10?
One of them will wait outside.
Oh, they're not going to be there together?
No, I thought it might be a bit awkward.
Okay.
They're competitors.
Yes, okay. So that's a 10...
Other on TV.
10 o'clock. That's a 10 a.m. Item there. So we'll go straight to the agenda now, and we'll just work our way through, and then possibly, just a moment, Councillor, I'll get to that. So, are there any notices? Yes, Councillor Dick.
Chairman, just in relation to field trips, unfortunately I can't, with my present mobility problem, I can't handle off-road field trips. So I'm out for this and probably in the future as well.
Thank you, Councillor.
Down here as well, Mr Chairman.
Mr Paku.
Just in regards, I did make an application, but I won't be available for this afternoon.
Not available this afternoon. Thank you. Thank you. Are there any other notices? None. I'll ask for apologies. I do have an apology for lateness from Councillor Wilson, who's trekking across the wilds from Wairoa. Are there any other apologies? Mr Mohe.
And I need to leave the meeting at 1:30 for another meeting with the Minister of Police.
Any other apologies for tardiness or anything like that? Do you have a move for the apologies, please? Thank you, Councillor Barker. Seconded, Councillor Bailey. Those in favour of receiving the apologies will say aye.
Aye.
Against will say no. That's carried. We've got the minutes of the meeting of the 6th of March. I'm assuming people have got those. Are there any corrections to be noted in those minutes?
Conflict of interest.
Oh, sorry. Did I get up to
You're having a shocker, Chair.
confirmation of this one? Okay. That'll be enough from you, Councillor.
Don't worry, he told me the same thing earlier.
I know, he tells everyone.
He likes to get in early with those kind of shocks.
His time is coming. Are there any conflicts in for this meeting? Councillor Hewitt.
Oh, it is previously noted, but I'm a trustee of the Cranford Foundation Trust.
Oh, okay. Thank you for that. Any other conflicts?
On the tourism days rating, I'm thinking of getting into that B&B business.
Is that a conflict for you?
Well, it is,
Councillor?
because you're going to rate me. There's a paper in here. It's pecuniary. So I'm just saying that I am thinking about it.
You're thinking about it. Okay. You're
Depending
thinking
on
about a
the rates.
conflict, or all right. Well, we've noted those conflicts and
That's a serious
potential
conflict. It
conflicts.
is a pecuniary conflict.
It is previously, Mr Chair, as the
Okay,
Chair
Mr.
of
Watt.
Māori Tourism, I mentioned my conflict perhaps.
Yeah, I don't see it as conflict, but you may.
You've
It's
got
up
to
to you.
mention it.
Yeah.
So welcome back, Mr Walker.
Yes.
I know, we need a trip report.
You need a trip report, yeah. Bloody hell.
All right. Well, thank you for that. We'll note those observations anyway. So going back to agenda item 3, which is the confirmation of the minutes. We've got those minutes. Are there any issues that you need to raise in terms of accuracy? No, there are none. We'll go to a mover for the minutes. Is someone prepared to move the minutes? Councillor Bailey. Mr Walker. We have the move and the second. Are there any... I'll just ask, are there any... No, I need to just go straight to the minutes. Those in favour of receiving the minutes will say aye.
Aye.
Those again will say no. Carried. Are there any matters arising? We're going to discuss the Organisational Finance and Audit Committee later. No matters arising. We'll now progress to minor items of business not on the agenda. Are there any minor items that people want to raise? There are none. We can go to the follow-ups, please, from the previous meeting. That's on page 3.
The first 3 of those are on the agenda for today. The organisational performance update is also on the agenda for today. Item number 5 that's been actioned, and information out on 6, and we've already been through the redrafted health and safety governance charter, so that's complete. There's one outstanding there from 3rd of October, financial treatment of conservation estate. Got a corporate strategic. I can't recall exactly what the...
So Manton is working on that. That's how we treat some of our forestry assets in our financials. So we're working through that with the changeover of CFO, essentially.
We'll be working through that before year end.
So it'll go to Finance and Audit Committee and then on to the community
for the end of year financial report.
Any issues in regard to the follow-ups that people want to raise?
So, just to confirm, item 1 is overtaken by item 9. Is that right?
That would be correct. So we do need to schedule the workshop. Jess was just raising that with me. Looking at the end of July or early August for that.
So effectively, potentially it could form part of a monthly council meeting. So the agendas for July and August are likely to be a bit lighter in terms of decision making. So we could schedule an hour and have the fund managers come and have a discussion around responsible investing, what we've become investing.
Happy to progress that way, Councillor. Is it tag it on to a council meeting and perhaps have an hour session with it? Sound all right? We'll do that.
Chair.
Councillor Graham.
So I missed the last meeting. Just did Mike talk about Maori constituencies, and so what is the resolve there? Are we going to further discuss it in September?
Well, there wasn't really. What's the next opportunity for
September,
consideration?
It's next year, 2020, September, November next year. That's what the email indicated. So it was really just to clarify when is the next formal opportunity for council to resolve to.
The latest one we could talk about any time we wanted, couldn't we?
You could, but then it has to link in with the electoral cycle as well. And the note here from Joe from the 8th of March indicates that the formal time to resolve it would be September, November next year.
But you're right, Councillor, we could raise it.
You can
but,
discuss it any time you like.
And is Tangata Whenua happy with that?
Yeah, I think just going back to the last meeting was a paper that had come forward within that pack, and it spoke about the Māori wards in general, but Māori wards, and I was just seeking clarity around that, just to make sure we understood the obligations around that for council and also for tangata whenua, and trying to get some clarity around those timeframes. I think it was just a little bit muddy last time around. I think we've got to say this paper is quite, I appreciate the paper, it's very clear, it's very simple, and it really lays out the steps forward if that is to be investigated again going forward. With the elections coming up, I understand that we have a number of interests from within the Māori community to put nominations forward for the positions of seeking to be elected onto the regional council. I think one of the questions there is a Māori face versus a Māori voice, and those implications around that. So I would think after the elections would be much be a good time for just to have another touch base on this. Yeah. Thank you for that, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. Welcome, Councillor Wilson. So are any other issues to do with any matters arising from the follow-up items? None. We've got to move to receive that report. Councillor Bevan, thank you. Mr. Paku, you happy to second that?
Yes.
Thank you. All those in favour of receiving the follow-up report, say aye.
Aye.
Those again will say no. I think we ought to move to agenda item 8, Hawke's Bay Tourism, so we can relieve Hamish. Do you want to come up front, Hamish? So it's agenda item 8 on page 21.
Yeah.
Tom, who's going to lead out on this?
Yeah, so thanks, Councillor. So joining Hamish is our Mandy Sharp and Trudy Kilcoy, who will be behind the paper. So I don't propose to go through the papers in front of you. There are effectively 3 parts to what we have here. In the staff paper, there is quite a detailed discussion around the ongoing issue of funding for tourism generally and some of the issues there. I think the paper speaks to the fact that it's a very dynamic environment. There's a lot going on nationally. There's also, through these reports, we see the emergence of the peer-to-peer. The Airbnb sector is growing, looks like it's growing like topsy, and so that's creating quite a challenge for not just this council, but all tourism industries to figure out how do they tap into that. Following, we have Hamish here. Hamish Saxton is the acting GM of Hawke's Bay Tourism. He can speak to the Hawke's Bay Tourism quarterly report. He can give us an update on the recruitment process that's been undertaken. And he can also lead into the decision item that we have for you here today, which is the adoption of key performance indicators for the funding agreement. And so following the reduction in funding through the long-term plan, effectively Hawke's Bay Tourism has been operating under an extension of their previous agreement, just to make sure that that's all in place, but subject to the reduced funding. And so we have been waiting for, for discussions to be had around the Hawke's Bay Tourism Board table in terms of what would be the proposed KPIs under the new funding arrangement, and understand that these proposed KPIs have been through the board and now presented to you today for your feedback and consideration. So if it's okay with you, Chair, I'll just hand straight over to...
Just before you do, we'll take this in the minor part, the economic development rates, which is our internal issue.
Yes.
Are there any comments on paragraphs 10 to 14? Are there any issues? Have you got feedback from the Commission around the changes? What's been the feedback there?
So the letter, I believe somewhere else in the papers today, there is the letter that is going out to the commercial ratepayers, reminding them of that decision through the LTP. So we haven't gone and sought specific feedback on that.
Feedback from the long-term plan?
Not specifically around the change and the allocation of rates, and last year we had a shift to 50-50 in terms of commercial and urban, and as far as I'm aware we didn't receive any feedback from ratepayers around that change, but they may feel a little bit more in terms of the commercial sector will certainly see an increase in their economic development rate this year, so we will be notifying them.
Any questions on that? No? All right, well, look, welcome, Hamish. And I want to speak to your report.
Kia ora everybody, thanks for inviting me along. I have been in the role of Acting General Manager for 6 weeks, with another 6 weeks to run. A brief update on the recruitment process, that applications have now closed for the GM position, so the board will now be in a position to create a shortlist and then commence within the next number of weeks the interview process. Happy to understand that you will have already gone through our quarterly report. The KPIs that we present and that we propose for discussion, I think what we've tried to do is, the major mandate for Hawke's Bay Tourism is one where simply in general it's the desire to have more people coming, more people visiting, spending more. And frankly, those are the main areas with which we are able to measure. There is a thing that you're possibly familiar with called the Commercial Accommodation Monitor. Commercial properties provide information on those that stay in their properties, and there's also a further measurement which is done on visitor spend that we receive reports on. But sometimes that doesn't tell the full picture on what the activities of the organisation are, and that's what we also attempted to do, was to demonstrate that there are probably a number of activities that the organisation can report on that would be expectations of what we do and what we receive funding for. So happy to take any questions or receive any feedback on that.
I'm sure there's some questions coming forward. Mr. Walker.
Yeah, have you done a survey of the general ratepayer in terms of where they might, what areas they may wish tourism growth? Because in any industry you have to have a level of balance, and some people maybe are fed up with, you know, their town being taken over at times. So has there been a survey done in terms of ratepayer satisfaction? I know, you know, like there are sometimes poorly planned events whereby half the hill's cut off and some people can't get access to customers to their businesses. I've had that. I've lost thousands of dollars sometimes because people haven't been able to get up to the prison. So I just, you know, I've got another question in terms of the KPIs. Congratulations, it's good to see those. But they're all KPIs. In terms of this Māori tourism business development support, do you have a budget for that? Well, that's good to hear. We did ask that question and we got a response when we met with Andy. And also, is there a strategy to deliver that?
Perhaps, so I'll answer the first one first, and then I'll move on to the next. So there has not yet been a survey of ratepayers as such. However, recently we presented a proposal for a visitor strategy and destination management plan. Within this concept is that concept not just of how a region should see itself, but perhaps also how it should manage itself as a destination. And part of the issues that you bring up there
would be covered within that strategy. Now that is a project that our organisation has been asked to commence. So I would expect that that in fact would be a 12-month process, with the results of that able to be presented certainly after the end of the following financial year, and obviously in time for discussions so that it is aligned with the long-term plan. That means that the organisation will have to also have discussions widely and with key stakeholders. So key stakeholders will include obviously regional council, local councils, ratepayers in some way, shape or form. It will need to integrate with frameworks that are already in existence, whether that be iwi, whether that be the Matariki Reds, whether that be national and other regional tourism strategies. So a lot will have to be taken into account of. Part of the second part of the question related to Maori tourism development. Whilst I can't say that there is currently a budget line specifically to that, it is part of what the organisation, what Hawke's Bay Tourism and the board expects of the organisation, and a strategy along those lines has been created in conjunction also with our board member Hinawai Waikarangi. So that is now underway, and we are investigating more ways to ensure that we're able to deliver on that as a KPI.
Thank you.
Any other questions you've got on this? I've got a couple of Councillor Bailey.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of questions, but just a comment on what Toro had asked with respect to the development of the strategy. I just want to make it quite clear that the question I asked to be put into the strategy, because it wasn't there when it was presented, was how much tourism is too much tourism for Hawke's Bay? Because I have had a number of residents come back to me and suggest that they feel like they're exhibits in a zoo. And I think that's a really important question to consider for the future, right? So, and the strategic plan is the place for that to actually be put into. So I'm happy for that work that's been done, but just to make it quite clear what I'm after, I don't want it confused with anything else, that's all. I want to make it quite clear. On page 24 of our agenda papers, you suggest that you have 386 paying members. That's right at the very top, in the top paragraph, in the top box.
Sorry, your page 24 might not be the same as my page 24, so my apologies.
It's in the staff note.
So the staff, is it the staff report or the
Staff report. Is that a number that's increasing, decreasing? Have you got a have you got a strategy to increase that number?
Well, firstly, we're actually going out to talk to all of our members at the moment. So the latest update from my team is that we've got roughly 390 members and more than 400 listings on our website. So there is a need for a continual membership drive with those that we identify as being members, but particularly actually those that may have also fallen off, because we have a membership system that's currently aligned to our website content, and we have had some people effectively fall off that list. So we're contacting them all at the moment to revive that.
Have you got a strategy in place to be increasing those numbers, so that we can, I want to get a good feel about how well the industry in Hawke's Bay actually supports tourism in Hawke's Bay.
Yeah. Well, as I say, I have developed or got the team to develop a list that is being audited right at the moment. So in terms of finding more or identifying more, that's not in place just at this stage. It's something I guess we can look at, and certainly there's the discussion right now about the peer-to-peer consideration as well, the peer-to-peer accommodation, which has been identified at, what did we say, more than 1,000 properties potentially promoting their own businesses in a tourism sense.
Okay, because as a member of the public looking at this particular report, which they're quite entitled to, it's a public document, I'd be going, actually, you've got 386 members, we're spending $1.5 million a year on you guys. That's a subsidy of $3,886 per member. And if I was any other business, I'd be going, yee-haw, right? So it's just, if the industry doesn't support tourism Hawke's Bay, then I have to look at myself and go, why should all the ratepayers continue to support tourism Hawke's Bay?
Sure. And might I just say that doesn't also necessarily reflect the support that we do receive. Having just attended a trade show 2 weeks ago called Trends in Rotorua, we were supported by 10 businesses who were investing at least $10,000 each in that particular event. It was $100,000 of support from local business, of which many other businesses will also benefit. So that specific number of just the 380 also doesn't necessarily tell the full story of the level of support that certainly some big businesses are also putting into the organisation.
Well, I appreciate that you may have members that contribute a significant amount, and I'm fine with that, but in pure numbers, that just, it's a look, it's the optics of it. The other question I've got is on the living wage survey that you completed.
Just before you go there, I want to hold that question because I've got a similar one myself in regard to membership. A note on the report, the profit and loss statement. It's on our page 36. On what page it is of your report. But the industry partnership membership year-to-date actual 58,820 against a budget of 102. Is there can you help explain that? Is it a timing thing, or what's it likely to end up on?
It's partially a timing thing and partially a reflection of the switch to a computerised membership system and aligned to a website. And what that has demonstrated is that some of the businesses that ought to be paying more for membership right now are not necessarily, the full amount that they should be paying has not necessarily been captured. So right now the team is going through a line by line, making sure that those businesses who ought to be paying more for what they're receiving, i.e. membership plus listings on the website, are going to be appraised of what it is that they should have been paying. So
you're likely to get the money or not?
I don't believe we're going to get the full amount, but we're going to be trying as hard over the next 3 weeks to ensure that we can get as much as we possibly can.
So we're way behind the 8 ball in terms of the industry support?
For that system, correct, yeah.
Okay, I'll just follow up with Councillor Belford. May shed some light, or is it a different issue?
I'm just flagging, I'll have some comments to make.
Okay, all right. Go back to you, Councillor Bailey.
Thank you, Chair. Just going to the living wage survey on page 30 of our papers, how many members actually ended up responding to that survey?
I'm sorry, I don't have that figure.
How many?
I don't have that figure, I'm sorry, but I can get back to you on that. I don't know.
Well, it makes the survey results a bit of a nonsense because we don't actually know how much penetration you had with your membership. So again, I don't know how interested your members are in moving towards this sort of thing. So I'm truly disappointed that you haven't got those numbers in there, or you haven't got them up to hand.
I'll take that on board.
Are there any other comments on?
Are we talking about? Are we going to? Sorry, Chair. Are we going to talk about the KPIs separately, or?
Well, I was looking to do that next, but Mr. Parker.
Yeah, I just had one question. That was just in regards to Wairoa and the rocket lab. Has there been studies or any research starting to be undertaken in regards to how that has been received, and are we starting to see uplift in interest Yep.
I like the word uplift. I think that's great. Not, to my knowledge, there hasn't been any specific work done on that, but again, I would expect that in the development of a destination strategy that where potential is identified, and certainly Rocket Lab has been identified in the past, that would be integrated into a plan.
If I could just add a comment there that some prior to rocket launch, actually launching, this council supported quite a comprehensive study of how best to manage that that event and activity, and so and that's really been handed over to Wairau District Council as part of something then to take up the recommendations or otherwise.
Councillor Hewitt.
Thanks, Chair. Just to the Hamish off the hot seat. Question for Tom, I think. Tom, I see that we're looking here to advocating central government supplying a share of the GST that's taken. Has any thought been given to having a crack at that new visitor levy that Eugenie Sage has announced will be coming in on tourists?
So is that the visitor tax levy? So I'm not going to handball this straight back to Hamish, but it may end up back in is that there has recently, and I'm not sure whether it's in here, the government has recently indicated how they are going to spend that, and they have very specific...
Is it contestable? I mean, can we try?
No, it doesn't appear to be contestable. I think that's correct. It's they're very specific. A lot of it is going towards, I think, well, also DOC, to support, some of the sites and some of the destinations that are certainly under a lot of pressure.
With the GST levy, I mean, obviously the GST is already spent, so I'm just wondering if we can put some pressure on there too.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot going. I think I said in my opening comments, there's a lot going on around the place, and not necessarily the same things around the place in terms of Queenstown's bed tax, I think, and other activities. So it's a very messy and dynamic area at the moment. And the Tourist Industry Association, you may recall that Annie Dundas was part of the sprint work that led ultimately. I'm not sure they entirely followed the sprint group's recommendation, but they came up with a recommendation which, certainly if it was followed and implemented would be provide an enormous amount of funding for tourism in the whole, not just Hawke's Bay tourism, but tourism infrastructure and delivery and destination management. But that's an industry lobby, putting its best foot forward. I don't know, Hamish, do you have any other comments?
No, I think what you've said is correct. I would just add that the board of Hawke's Bay Tourism did meet yesterday, and one of the outcomes of that was for us to have a position in these funding discussions. So that's something that we are going to be working on.
I'd just like to, Councillor Belford, I'd like if you could comment on anything to date. I think we should call upon you to give some clarity around some board activities, but is there anything specific?
On this point, the board met yesterday, and there was quite a bit of discussion about the charge from this council to have a plan B on funding. I think the sentiment of the folks on the board who are more plugged into the tourism industry machinations and so forth was that it was totally wishful thinking to expect that this GST proposition was going to go anywhere. So we as a council need to understand that, or I think one suggestion yesterday was that the tourism board needed to communicate to this council that maybe appropriate representation from this council ought to visit with the tourism minister, and so we then satisfy ourselves directly as to what the situation is or is not, because that has a bearing then on how strongly we press the staff to pursue things like peer-to-peer opportunities and so forth. But if there was if we had an expectation here that there was going to be there's a chart in here that speculates $10 million would arrive in Hawke's Bay for tourism funding, it ain't going to happen in the next near to intermediate time. So that then puts a focus on, and we have excellent relationships with certain ministers that we've pursued in areas of priority to us, like water and so forth. But I'm not aware that we have had the same aggressiveness vis-a-vis the tourism part of the government. And so if we harbor any aspirations of getting money out of central government, I think we're going to have to take that on ourselves as a council and decide that we want to pursue it, or we want to at least clarify what the situation is. So that is one point. But that does then, so the board sat there yesterday and absorbed that, and I guess concluded that, well, as much as we think it's a bad idea, we might have to look at regional solutions, which everybody in the industry is seeking to avoid by having things like the GST tithing and what have you. But if we have to look at something like bed tax or peer-to-peer or whatever locally, then we need to get on with it and do that. And so that's probably the sentiment that would inform a reaction to the staff paper, which I think the Hawke's Bay Tourism Board would say, lots of problems. Airbnb doesn't want to do this on a regional basis. Airbnb would welcome a national approach to this, but it's not up to Hawke's Bay Tourism to convince Airbnb to have a national approach to this. It's up to the industry as a whole and or the government to pursue that kind of approach. So the read of the staff memo was that, yeah, it looks like mechanically a way could be figured out to do this, and we need to go down that path if it's, frankly, the only apparent one available to us, if there's not going to be a rescue.
Okay, thanks, Tom. Are there any other matters that you want to raise out of this? We'll probably go to the KPIs, Councillor Bailey, now, but anything else apart from KPIs that people want to raise?
Just, I think that we need to be realistic in terms of these taxes, in particular the startup ones. I don't think there should be any penalties or expectation for businesses that have probably only been in play about 5 years. I think those are well established. Yes, go at them, but tourism is a seasonal business, and a lot of tourism entities struggle in the winter. So you've got to have a bit of balance here.
Thanks, Mr. Walker. Councillor Bailey, did you have something on KPIs? Do you want to?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just looking through the KPIs, many of them don't actually have much of a measure on them, apart from just identify things or whatever. But there's a couple of other things I'd like to have considered in as KPIs, which I think are quite relatable to what the task is in hand for Hawke's Bay Tourism. One is I'd like to see some sort of KPI on there about increasing membership in the region. I think it behoves the industry to actually show their support for what Hawke's Bay Tourism is doing by actually subscribing or becoming members and paying an annual fee or whatever it is they have to do so. If you're talking about 1,000 odd B&Bs or whatever, if they're people that are basically freeloading off the work that you're doing by not contributing, I'd be really disappointed in that. The other one is I'd like to see a KPI on there about a number of members joining annually or signing up annually to the living wage program. It's difficult to put a number on that right now because I'm not sure of what the survey results are, and that's where the number that actually responded, I think, is going to be key to that.
Thank you, Councillor Bailey. Any other points on KPIs? I've got one, but I want to raise the issue of a contribution by Hawke's Bay Tourism towards the Council's climate change goals, and I'm not seeing anything here that looks like that. Across the board, we're needing to see major shifts, and tourism, it occurs to me that we're investing heavily to bring people to us by air, contributing to carbon emissions, and I think, I'm not sure whether Councillor Belford, the board has actually turned their minds to this, but we've got a strategy that's counter to the direction of travel for this council and for the region. Is there a strategy to change dramatically the direction of travel for tourism promotion to limit carbon emissions?
Very good pun, change the travel direction.
Chair,
Councillor Graham.
I just have some general comments. Firstly, I strongly support that we get on with it and don't rely on government or any central planning. We'll wait forever. This council's often led the way. We led the way on a lot of environmental issues like oil and gas, and now everyone catches up and thinks that they're wonderful. But we need to lead the way on this too, because you'll never get a resolve out of central government. That's all there is to it, and you'll never get any change to the way we do this. The other thing is the new CEO. It's a really important placement, and he did a pretty good job in embracing the community, and so getting the right CEO is absolutely crucial for this organisation, because it's often seen, and I think rightly so too, as being very self-obsessed, a very self-focused organisation.
Excuse me, Councillor, if you'd like to move the adoption of the recommendation, you'll have full licence.
Move then, and
Thank you.
I've still got some comments I'd like to make.
Can we move to debate, or do you want to comment?
You're having a shock at Chair.
No, I know.
Second quickly.
I'm just conscious of moving this along.
I'll
Councillor.
move it.
Okay, and you've seconded Councillor Bevan. You're welcome to speak.
Hang on. What am I seconding?
The adoption of the.
And then you can
You received the report, and your recommending the KPIs be adopted as well.
So you're not going to engage in any further discussion on the series of options for funding? That's done.
Well, I've opened the forum extensively for people to comment. Nothing has come forward, so I'm ready.
Well, yeah, that's because I thought we were dealing with the report
my
and then
apologies.
the
All right,
KPIs.
let's go back. Have you finished your dissertation?
No,
He's in full stride. He wants to go
right in the middle.
I'm pleased to have stopped you.
Fortunately, I've got notes.
I'll keep it in mind that you're looking to move, so you can speak twice to it. Now, Councillor Bevan, please speak up and tell us what's on your mind.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I appreciate the opportunity to do so.
Unburden yourself.
Just a brief comment on the KPIs. I like the idea, but in my view, a lot of these aren't detailed enough so that we can assess some form of measurement. Just to give you one example, regional events delivery. You've got delivery of summer and winter fall. Are you trying to grow the number of events? Are you trying to shrink the number of events? Are you trying to increase the number of people that go to Fork? I want to see a more specific milestone against which we can measure this. That's just one example, and I won't go into any more detail, but there are a number of others where I think we can put something in there that makes it more measurable, and for you, a target.
Yep.
Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Similar comments. I'm inclined actually not to recommend adopting these today, but I think they need to go back and have a lot more work done on them, but someone else might have a different view on that. Are there any other issues on KPIs that you want to explore? Councillor Dick.
Mr. Chairman, this issue of a KPI on climate change would have to be considered very carefully, because if what you're advocating is reducing travel, and travel by virtually every means involves carbon emissions, then that defeats the purpose of this industry, of actually getting people in here.
You're quite right.
So what do we do? Close them down and save some emissions?
Well, maybe we need to do something like that. So we
I
need to
can't
do
buy
something.
that.
But so what needs to happen, in response to Councillor Dick, is that the KPIs need to be well developed. There are far too many of them to start, and we need to think about how they are to be measured and what the implications are for Hawke's Bay tourism. So that's where I'm at on it. Councillor Belford, have you got a comment on that in terms of?
Oh, he's allowed to comment.
Yes, he is.
Oh, how about, here's a representative on the board, Chair.
He's the one responsible for this. His tongue out at me.
The issue of metrics was discussed yesterday, and exactly this point was raised by a couple of the other members. When you get past points 1 and 2, 1 and 2 are obviously quantitatively based and so forth. Everything after that is kind of activity reporting. And so, yes, you could put numbers on the activities and say we'll have 3 more, activities than last year when we had 2. But it wasn't necessarily clear that what that added up to in terms of the key performance indicators being 1 and 2, more visitors and more spend. And so it's an argument we've gone around and around on every time this group comes before us. How do you relate the array of activities that are embedded in their strategy to actual improvement of the visitor spend at the end of the day? And everybody throws up their hands and says, don't know, but if we don't spend it, we won't get there. That's about as useful as the metrics are, frankly. So we can twiddle our fingers around putting more precision to them, but my own view, sitting on both boards, is that it's a largely fruitless exercise.
I agree entirely. Mr. Walker.
Yes, the constraint in terms of the development of tourism in Hawke's Bay is we need to develop off-season type activities, and that would be a focus that I would like to see within the.
So you'd like to see a KPI that looks like that, Mr. Walker?
Get too many people in the summer, and you get very few in the winter.
I think we get your point.
Get the balance right.
We're up to the point of.
I'll second what he's doing.
You've moved the receipt of the report
And the KPIs.
And the KPIs.
I second that.
You're quite happy with the KPIs, Councillor?
I quite like the some of the changes that were suggested, but I'm reasonably happy.
I'm happy. It's only 2 KPIs to look at, just been told.
Well, should in fact we modify the list of KPIs down to the 2 or 3, or ask Hawke's Bay Tourism to come back with a new schedule of KPIs for the next meeting? What do you want to do?
I can vote against them too.
Okay. All right. So we've got, yeah, no, I've seen that. We've got the mover and a seconder for the recommendation. One is to receive the report, 2 is to adopt the KPIs. You want to speak to that, Councillor?
I do. Perhaps we could ask every visitor to plant a tree, which would help you a little wee bit, and people would be excited by that. And I know it's just a bit of a fob, but if we said to everyone who comes to visit, you stick in $20 for planting a tree to offset, because it is a real issue, but as Alan's pointed out, it's one really difficult to cope with, because we're all flying around the world, and planting trees isn't actually going to offset all that. But I would have focused more on the culture of your organisation, because it's easily, and I don't want to be too critical, because it's easy for this organisation to be self-obsessed, which it is, even when Annie was there, and maybe even especially, because it's an exciting thing and you're having fun, and I go to some of your events and it's a fun industry, so by definition, really. So everybody's talking to each other and holding each other's hands. But you need to be aware that you're dealing with the community out there, and I don't think Hawke's Bay Tourism is. And a manifestation of that was when Annie left. No karakia, no acknowledging of Bill Dalton, who had just recently had a stroke and had such a huge contribution and was the mayor of our major tourism town. No real acknowledgement of the Hawke's Bay Regional Council except the previous chief executive. No who was personally acknowledged, but the regional council, the difficulties, and I spoke a little bit about that, is you do not have universal support around this table, and some of the councillors have stuck their neck out and supported the 1.8 in the first instance. That was not the previous chief executive, that was interim chief executive. And a lot of councillors who are still around this table stuck their neck out to get the 1.8 and continued to stick their neck out to get the 1.5. No acknowledgement. It was just like a rite of passage. And I'm sitting there thinking, oh, well, it was kind of like we didn't exist. We're not sitting around here wanting acknowledgements for everything we do, but it is just indicative of Hawke's Bay Tourism being a little cuddly little group that have no, not respect, but no acknowledgement for the rest of the community. And I think you get a bit of that from Toro, and I think rightly so. So, whoever your new chief executive is and whoever your board is, you need to be part of this community and not just a little niche off the side. So that's just trying to be positive. Don't want to put too many negatives in there. But I really felt that you need a cultural shift.
Councillor Bevan, have you got something to say at this point?
I'll support the motion, and I just want to make a comment about the funding. And this council has indicated previously that Hawke's Bay Tourism funding is on short notice, and they need to develop an alternative model. I'm really concerned that this has got stuck somewhere and the wheels are spinning. I personally still think that the bed tax is the best way to do this because it's easy and simple and you pay as you go. But it appears that the minister's rejected that. That's most unfortunate because any of these other models, it seems to me, have got significant problems with getting them right and getting them to be fair. And I think there are some salutary lessons that we need to be mindful of from the taxes or the rates the tiered rates that were introduced in Auckland that caused all sorts of problems because they could only be applied retrospectively. They set levels like 28 days or 50 days accommodation or whatever it was, and that was unfair, and houses sold and they were being retrospectively rated and they were no longer used for accommodation. People withdraw from the system because they think it's unfair. So there's all sorts of problems with a rate-based system of raising funds like they tried in Auckland. And I think that as the Hawke's Bay Tourism takes this forward and looks at the models, they need to be very mindful of what's happened elsewhere and hasn't worked fairly. So I'll
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Belford, please.
First of all, I think the very last sentence of what you said, Peter, the Hawke's Bay Tourism takes us forward. They're not going to take it forward. Our staff is going to have to figure out how to make, how to tithe what is now $25 million worth of revenue going to peer-to-peer operators in some way to contribute to the greater good here of tourism support. Hawke's Bay Tourism is going to follow along in the wake of how our staff figures out how to do that if we instruct them today to do it, which I don't think the resolution as it's drafted is sort of like says, accept this. There are 5 or 6 options presented as to how to get there. I don't think we have any capability to advise you which of those options might be the best mousetrap, but I think we are saying collectively, if I could guess here, that yes, we want you to proceed to figure out a way to tap that and bring that back to us as something that we can approve at a later point. To Rex's point about culture, I think that really does nail something. I think the Hawke's Bay Tourism Board is going, I think, through a bit of a mental shift where it has seen itself really as only, it is a marketing agency that is tasked with delivering on those first two items, get more people to spend more money, period. We've come along in the debate we've had about our support of that and said, no, wait a minute, you're operating in a broader community context. So we have expectations about the environment. We have expectations about pay rates and so forth. You're going to have to operate as though you were a creature in that environment, not just somebody interested in bed nights. And I think that's getting traction, but that's why you see reflected in the KPIs that there's not the same precision, if you will, because those other KPIs are where these other issues get picked up. And the marketing guys who are sitting there, like Michael Henley and Dave Simmons and so forth, their mindset is, do we have a strategy that is delivering more visitor spend? Period. And that, and then, oh yeah, we have to do these other things too. But it's getting there. Just ask a little bit of patience, but it is getting there.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other comment from anyone? Councillor Wilson?
Seconder, thank you, Chair.
Oh, you're a seconder.
I thought you were.
Oh, my apologies. Yeah. Oh, Councillor Wilson.
I'm getting used to it.
I just want to say, just to prove again, you're having a shot.
I don't even have to say it. I think the conversation here around who's in, who's out, who pays, who says, etc., we've really got to pare it back to this organisation does international and national work locally, basically. Its aim is to get as many people here as spending as much as they can. When they get here, that's when the TAs and others come on board and do their good work with their facilities, etc. The peer-to-peer stuff is getting away on the country, I think. It's not just in Hawke's Bay, and a way to capture some of that needs to be determined and quickly. And I agree it's probably going to be a local solution driven by this council in the first instance. I think that's where we're going to have to end up. There's no clear pathway otherwise. And as far as the spend goes, I actually think when you look later in the agenda, this line item, it spends all the money we give it, unlike some of the others in the organisation. And that's a sign of they're getting on and doing the work. They're doing what we've asked them to set the KPIs, in particular the first two, which are motherhood and apple pie. I get that. At least they've got something to work to now. I mean, they've gone 11 months with nothing in the first round of this budget. So I think the KPIs, while they're not perfect, are a kick-off place, and they can be modified as time goes on.
Thank you, Councillor. Mr. Paku.
Yeah, I did have a bit of issue around those, I think, KPIs. I feel that the council needs to be quite clear about what its strategy is. Because at times, listening to the conversation this morning, we've heard we want tourists here, but we don't want them to fly here, we don't want them to come by boat. How the hell do we want them here? Do we want them to walk here? While they're here, we don't want them to do anything because they're going to make a mess and leave their rubbish behind that we have to clean up. So I think we just need to be a bit clear from the council's perspective what the strategy is. Because in setting the KPIs, Tourism Hawke's Bay needs to know what it is, the expectations are from the council. And that will go some way to helping to really clarify what the KPIs and expectations are going to be in regards to expectations. So, kia ora.
Very, very precise. Thank you, Mr. Paku. I enjoyed that. Councillor Dick.
Mr. Chairman, I think it's most important for Hawke's Bay Tourism to be focused on the job of getting visitors, domestic and international, into Hawke's Bay, and not be distracted into activities like social engineering.
Councillor Bailey.
Thank you, Chair. I'm inclined to agree with comments other councillors have made around the challenges we have with the funding models, and I'll await the outcome with that with great interest. With respect to the KPIs, this is an organisation which takes a significant amount of money off the ratepayers of Hawke's Bay, and I think there is a trade-off for them to do that. That's why I'd like to see some sort of measurable numbers around, especially around how many of the industry actually signs up for the living wage program annually. Like I say, I'm not entirely sure what that number should be, simply because I don't know the results of the survey. And and similarly with respect to having a number around increasing membership, is specifically so that you get, the public can be assured that the industry actually supports itself and is interested in what itself is doing. Because otherwise there was no, to have 200, whatever the number was, out of so many thousand that are out there, I think is not a good look. So I'm really keen to see some sort of number in there around that and around the living wage one. I agree with a lot of this other sentiment. At the end of the day, the two key KPIs are 1 and 2, but I think, like I say, there's a trade-off for you taking the money off the ratepayers.
Councillor Stewart.
Thank you. Hamish, thanks for stepping in, and I would like to wish the board the best of luck in the appointment of the new CEO, and I look forward to meeting him or her in due course. And obviously it's not always an enviable task sitting up the front here, so I would like to wish him lots of luck too.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other comment before I hand back to...
On a question?
Well, it's not, we're out of questions. We're into debate. We'll make a comment.
And this is probably a sensitive one, but have we got the right councillor on Hawke's Bay Tourism? Because I note from the last meeting, the councillor said there was only 2 Māori tourism operators in Hawke's Bay, and I find that quite insulting.
Whatever that means.
I've got 2 myself. One is the only tourism industry here to make the blue list of the Lonely Planet ever, in the lower south of half of the North Island. My other tourism company have got 100 tours around the world that people download off their phones. So I've got 2, but there are other people out there.
Thank you, Mr. Walker. And before going to Councillor Graham, I've got some comments to make in reply. There are two issues of concern to me. One is the first one, which is a much lesser issue, but an important one all the same, and that's the performance of Hawke's Bay Tourism around funding. Clearly, we've got numbers going in the wrong direction. We've got dollars going in the wrong direction. This council sent a very clear signal that we expected the sector to step up and help fund. It can't even come to the party with 100,000, so we've got a real problem. The most important issue, though, and it goes to a comment made by Councillor Dick, but particularly by Councillor Mr. Paku, is that this council needs to send a very clear signal to Hawke's Bay Tourism as to what it wants. We've had issues, for example, a bit of social engineering around the living wage. We've sent clear signals around that. But what we need to do is send a very clear signal, and this is where staff need to come to the party around the KPI process. I think they're wholly inadequate and reflect a lack of oversight by staff on the issue. The KPIs need to be much more precise, but particularly we do need to have the council's position on climate change reflected in the strategy. It's a little like the land transport strategy. We need to see significant shifts on climate change and an understanding and knowledge. I'd like to see, for example, the Hawke's Bay Tourism consider what the footprint is of its various operators in the sector, what the implications are for travel to the region, the promotions that we put in place to do that, and yes, we will have to think about limiting our flying miles to get here. That is inevitable. And even though some may balk at that idea, when you have the emission of something like 3% of the global output of carbon coming from directly into the atmosphere through air travel, we've got to rethink that. And if that means foregoing air travel, hopping on a ship, for example, and doing that travel, maybe that's the look of the future. So I'm suggesting that we do need for this council to think clearly about what it wants from its expenditure with Hawke's Bay Tourism and other agencies, And we need to be saying we need a collaboration right across the whole region, everywhere, look under every rock for answers to climate change. Later on in this paper, this agenda, we've got millions upon millions of dollars being spent on addressing climate change, raising the stop banks, doing all sorts of things to moderate climate change. And meanwhile, over at Hawke's Bay Tourism, we're advocating for the promotion of air travel from across the planet. These things, in my mind, are contradictory, and we need to respond to it. I'm not saying let's not have visitors. I'm saying, are we doing the right thing by encouraging that sort of visitor transaction? So that's my view, and I'm passing back to Councillor Graham.
I'd like to say something.
You'd like to say something as well, Councillor? Just a nick of time.
No, haven't called out. Well, can I say, I thought your last presentation, the Chair was right in many aspects, but wrong in others. I think the point you hit the nail on the head was the Council has to make up its mind what it wants out of tourism. And we have lamented the fact that they haven't got clear KPIs. You lamented the fact that the staff's recommendations were unclear or contradictory and so on. But I would say to you, this council is unclear about what it wants. On the one hand, you are advocating a very militant line on climate change and saying this is our priority and we should do nothing which mitigates against climate change. And those people who fly in here by plane and by jet all over the place are contributing to the damage to our environment, and as an environmental agency we should not be supporting them. On the other hand, we've got councillors here who say we should be promoting tourism because it promotes our region, it promotes growth. Well, this seems to me like the Brexit argument. We've got two lines on different sides here, completely contradictory. And if this council can't make up its mind, it can't expect to see clear KPIs and see clear recommendations from staff. We're in a quandary here. That's the point of this. Now, I just think council is going to have to take a deep breath and go away and have a think about this. On the one hand, you're absolutely right. We're supporting people flying here, doing all the damage we can to all the damage that entails to the climate because we're promoting it. Then on the other hand, we're spending money mitigating it. The only alternative hasn't been suggested is to get Cobb & Co out and make people come over by coach over the old coach road. But I mean, we're in a dilemma here, and we haven't thought this thing through. So I'm not going to apportion any responsibility here until we've figured out what we want. Either we are going to be a militant, strident environmental agency and say to hell with anything that mitigates against that, or we're going to be an environmental agency who welcomes job growth and welcomes tourism to Hawke's Bay because it makes us feel good. We have all these visitors coming here to see what we do. We've got to figure out which we are.
Councillor Graham.
Yeah, I don't really mean to relitigate the climate change things, but we clearly all have personal challenges there on climate change, and I think it's a little bit unfair to lament this with Hawke's Bay Tourism when everyone around this table is flying around the place anyway and doing it and driving petrol cars and and doing all sorts of things. So we're all personally challenged, and we're all challenged as local body officials and even as a government. I mean, how the government especially, I guess, with the biggest industry in New Zealand is the dairying industry. We all know what's happening there. So, but what I wanted to say to Tourism Hawke's Bay is I think personally you've done a fantastic job. That despite my slightly negative trying to be positive comments previously, I think you've done a really good job. You've done what we ask of you, and you've had your job was to promote tourism in our region, and you've had 6% growth on average. So, and some of that, a lot of that's got to be attributed to the work that you've done. So nobody here or anywhere can say you haven't done the job that we've asked you to do, and you've done it incredibly well. What I'm saying is you need to embrace our community a lot better than you do. because in the end, and even the points that Tony made, the people of Napier must be getting sick to death because it's our biggest tourist destination, and everyone sees everyone wandering around holding hands. I know it must be very romantic on those ships, that's it would get them down. I think their traffic gets altered and stopped, and it's not so bad on the rest of Hawke's Bay. So you need to talk to them as well. You need to talk to our community where we're going on this. But no doubt about it, you've done your job and you've done it particularly well. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. Have you got a point to make?
I just wondered if I could make a closing comment.
Just very briefly.
Thank you. It seems to me that all of this plays very nicely into the need for the development of a visitor strategy and destination management plan. These questions around direction, questions around community, questions around environment are all things that will need to be addressed in a destination management plan. So perhaps the timing is absolutely right for making sure that we are honed in on that project. As I say, it's going to be at least a 12-month project, but I think we've probably got greater clarity on some of the areas that we need to look at a little bit more closely. This is a partnership. It's a partnership between community. It's a partnership between our funders. We have a balancing act as well, partnership with aviation, ports, airlines, tourism community, local community. So thanks for your comments.
I think that's a good point. Look, I'll put the motion now that we receive and note the report and that we adopt those KPIs, or we recommend the adoption of those KPIs. We've got a week or two to consider that before it goes to council. So I'll put those recommendations. Those in favour will say aye. Aye. Those again will say no.
Sorry, which one are we?
I'll put both recommendations.
Put both of them. Put both of them?
Yeah.
Yep.
Do you want them separate? Or?
No.
Okay. I'll put them both. Those in favour will say aye. Those against will say no. That's carried. Now we're up to, what are we, 20 past 10. We've got nurses here. Who have we got? So if we go to agenda item 13, which is on your late item paper, that's the Treasury Report. And if we can get Brian and Reese, is it? Yes. Yep. Can you come up to the front and...
No, maybe if we do these guys.
Are the other guys?
You're right behind that.
Has everyone had a chance to read the late paper? I hope you have. If not in great detail...
Sorry, which paper?
This is the late paper, agenda item 13, the Treasury Report. This is the first Treasury Report. Could easily be described as interim. It's got a lot of features that are not complete, so don't be concerned if you see things or don't see things you want to see. We can correct that. But we've got Mercer here. Brian and Reese. Who's Brian? You're Brian?
I'm Reese.
Reese, you're Reese, you're Brian.
I've just got a
Welcome.
few slides that they're going to run through.
You're going to run through...
Slides.
Yeah, so...
Pretty simple slides, not too many of them. I'm
Just as
conscious
well
that
as-
you wanted us...
Sure, just as well as simple, we're a very simple council. So,
Speak for yourself, Chair.
so do you want to introduce yourself and
Yes,
tell us
sure.
about...
My name's Reese Wayburn. I head up client services for Mercer in New Zealand. My role, I was involved throughout in the original presentation to Hawke's Bay Regional Council. When we selected for this opportunity, I will be here at all the quarterly presentations, if that's how often you want us to come. Sometimes clients don't want us that often, but and my colleague here.
Hi, Brian Kearney. I work in the Auckland office of Mercer. I'm a senior investment consultant, and I also look after our delegated solutions business, which is essentially looking after the clients that invest in the Mercer multi-manager funds.
Do you want to say anything first?
We're just waiting for the slides to come up. So in terms of the Treasury Report, this is the first quarterly report from Treasury. So The intention of the Treasury Report is effectively to be presented and receive feedback through the Finance, Audit and Risk Committee. Unfortunately, it was a little bit late in being delivered, hence it's come to Corporate and Strategic this quarter. But the focus is really around the performance of the investment funds, so the diversified investment portfolios that are operated by Mercer and First New Zealand Capital, as well as to provide Council some feedback and some reporting around the debt funding strategy. So the debt funding strategy now includes borrowing from the LGFA, so incorporation of us joining the LGFA is now complete, and we have started borrowing, which gives us access to lower rates. The debt funding strategy effectively is to begin borrowing on a floating interest rate, which will ensure our compliance with our interest rate risk. And it's really to strike a balance between the long-term funding, cost certainty and concentration of risk, but also just to provide us access to lower borrowing rates. There is some commentary around the performance of the funds within the paper, but I think Brian and Reece will talk us through that if we can get the slides up.
Yeah.
Here we go.
All right. I think just the keyboard safe.
Yeah, we might put that aside.
I just clarify, looking for 10 minutes?
At max.
Max, that's
5
fine.
would be good.
That's fine, we can do it in 5. So that will keep questions to a minimum.
That's what he can't control.
Okay. Hand up to you.
We're just going to focus on a few key points. Conscious this is the first meeting, we will, I expect, to get into a rhythm in terms of the type of information you want to see and the way you want to present it. We're very flexible how we bring that together for you. So just any comments about how you'd like it restructured, what sort of information you want to see, just let us know and we'll recut that. But what we've done today is focusing on 3 key points, which we can do in 5 or so minutes. So the 3 points are, we just want to talk, just give you a snapshot of how the transition of the funds went and how the money transitioned, that process. Performance to date, it's been a very short period of time, but just give you an update in terms of where the money is and how it's doing. And then the final point is just a quick helicopter view of the responsible investment approach that has been taken with the funds that are invested from Hawke's Bay Regional Council in the Mercer multi-manager funds.
So first on the transition, the first investment came in on the 18th of January, that was 5 million, and then subsequently more came in, totaling 20 million over the first quarter. Most importantly to note from our perspective, the way that our infrastructure works is the minute that we received your money, it was put to work in line with the strategy, so that we essentially get our operations team and our underlying managers prepared for that, and then we do what's called pre-trading, so that once the money comes in, close of business that day, it's in line with targets. So we have been in line with the targets of the mandate as well as your SIPO from day one. And that obviously helps, especially in the market that we've had in Q1, to not be sitting out of the market essentially, so be sitting in cash while you ramp up. That's quite an important part of institutional wealth management when you're dealing with money of this size. Days out of the market can be costly. Another point to note is the fees of the transaction. At all levels, so that's investing in, we've set up a private portfolio for you, which is the Hawke's Bay Regional Council Mercer portfolio, and then that obviously is comprised of all the sub-funds that make up your strategy. So when you take all the transaction costs of all those layers into account, it came in at just over 15 bips, and there's no fee to Mercer in that. So we earn the base fee, and then everything else in terms of transactional activity is done at cost, and we make it as efficient as possible, and that benefits all investors in our funds. Briefly looking at the asset allocation. So this is, as of last Thursday, was the most recent I could get, so that's the 30th. sitting at just under 6% in Trans-Tasman shares, just over 30% in overseas shares, 14% in real assets, 14% in New Zealand bonds, 26% in global bonds, and 10% in cash. So now what's useful to draw out of that is really what does that look like relative to your strategy? And the highlights there are we have a dynamic asset allocation, so essentially a tilt away from New Zealand shares slightly and into global shares, and that's based on our valuation assessment. We've had that tilt throughout our Mercer portfolios for some time, and that's really just reflecting the fact that New Zealand shares on a pure valuation basis are fairly expensive, and we expect that to revert slightly over time. Similarly, we have an underweight to bonds and real assets and a little bit more in cash, and that's really just reflecting our view of those asset classes being expensive. Those are positions that don't change that frequently. We revisit them each month, but they tend to be 9 to 12-month views, and they feed through from a very robust dynamic asset allocation process, which goes from global to Pacific, and then in New Zealand we have our CIO.
Yep, thanks. Just for the members of the public that are watching, real assets, how are they compared to made-up assets? Or
that's
just
only
give a very brief definition of that.
So real assets, in this case, is really property and infrastructure. Yep. So there are a few sectors underneath there, and there are commodities and other things, but really it's thinking of property and infrastructure.
Yep. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. So 60%, give or take, offshore. Do we get any benefit out of a softening dollar?
Yes. So part of the strategy is that it's 50% hedged, the global equity part of that. So we only have 10 minutes, so not going into too much detail, but essentially having unhedged positions is a diversifier, so it helps quite a lot in terms of creating a portfolio that is efficient. And then one of the things that we've seen recently is obviously as the dollar softens, you do benefit from that. So you get a bit of a kick from that. We also have a slight dynamic tilt, so 50% is the strategy. We have a slight dynamic tilt which further supports that view. So we've been slightly more underweight the hedged part of the portfolio with a view that the dollar has a little bit more room to fall.
Just a question over here. Is this more of a growth or balanced portfolio?
That's a difficult one because it's bespoke for you. It's a 50-50 mix of what we would call defensive and growth assets. You would normally think of a growth portfolio being probably 60-40 with more growth. And the defensive obviously being the opposite of that. So you're sort of in the middle, and it's designed to meet your objectives.
Thank you. Councillor Graham.
I've two points of interest. One, I'm interested to see they have 10% in cash.
Sorry, I can't hear you.
I'm interested to see they have 10% of cash. But also, I'd like your comment on where you think equities are going with this trade war, and you know, how worried are you guys about Brexit, trade wars, the volatility that's in the market at the moment?
Yes.
So cash then first.
Cash first.
Which is
the question being, why is it at 10%?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the strategic asset allocation in your portfolio is 5% in cash. That the 10% is a combination, and a cash allocation strategically is necessary, both operationally, if you ever want to draw money out, that's just a standard part of your portfolio, but actually we see it as part of fixed income. So really, when you look at it packaged with your fixed income assets, it's just a lower duration. So it's a fixed income asset with no interest rate risk, essentially. So when you put it together, what matters is how does that package look in your portfolio, and that is one of the reasons why in most of our portfolios we have a higher than necessary cash allocation, because when combined with fixed interest assets, so your bonds, it makes the complete portfolio in line with the duration risk we want. So that's the primary reason for us having cash in a portfolio. And then the other part of that is that there are dynamic tilts there where essentially we are slightly underweight bonds, so we want less interest rate risk, and that sits in cash to do that. So it's a combination of those two things.
Just on that, to summarise, the bonds aren't, interest rates are so low globally that we are concerned about the degree to which a rise in interest rates would hurt bond returns quite significantly.
cash returns actually aren't that bad, and relative to what you can get in bonds, and as a consequence, they're less risky. So it's about de-risking the portfolio should there be a rise in interest rates, because bonds rates can't go any lower. I mean, globally, the rates are, negligible.
All right.
And volatility.
Your second part, that's going to be difficult to do in the time. But essentially our view, and we established this view, if you remember, the volatility really entered the market in October last year. That's when we first saw the rally and sort of turn, and a lot of market commentary was coming out about, is this a bear market? As succinctly as I can put, we have a very strong research team globally. They put out a research piece in the middle of October, essentially assessing the fundamentals and saying, well, is this volatility a reflection of a change in fundamentals or not? Our view was it wasn't. It was pure volatility because of all these risks coming together and other aspects. The output of that was that we have an investment strategy just like your portfolio does. So we have investment strategies across our clients and our portfolios, and we essentially stuck to our guns. So you have a long-term strategy that is designed to ride these out. So rather than being reactionary at the end of December, we stuck to strategy, and obviously we benefited from the fact that things have rebounded since. It's a good lesson in why you shouldn't be too reactionary when you have a long-term strategy and a long-term investment horizon. In terms of our outlook, it's much of the same. We expect more volatility because of these risks, but we don't see any recessions on the horizon for any major economies, and that's generally what you would need to see if you were thinking that we're going into a bear market. So that's
Corporate profits are still high globally, and Brexit, for example, the UK is not a key driver of the global economy. It is a component, it is a potential threat, but it won't upset it.
Press on.
Yes.
Right, and then the last piece. Oh, sorry.
So, very briefly, this is the stepping of the cash flows that you've seen since the 18th of January. First investment on the left, 5 million. Subsequently, 15 million came in during the quarter, and then investment returns of 770k on that. As Jess alluded to, this has really been a period of transition for you. So from a reporting perspective relative to benchmark, things only really start piecing together from the next meeting. So when we do the Q2 reporting, we'll be able to do a bit more analytical assessment in terms of benchmark relative performance.
Councillor
Just quickly, through you, Chair, to the CFO, are you comfortable with the returns here? Are we going to miss targets? Are we going to hit targets? What are we doing?
We're likely to be a little bit short this year, but it's mainly due to the late allocation of funds, so it did take longer to incorporate or set up the fund than we had anticipated. So effectively the funds weren't fully placed until late in the last calendar year. So we're likely to be a little bit short, but in terms of actual annual returns, if the funds are being placed for the full year, we would have exceeded our
A little
target.
bit short's a technical term a farmer would use.
I use it all the time.
Well,
A
it's
bit
hard to
more
know,
precision
so
around a little bit short.
Based on the return, so 774 to date, about 100k short this year.
This financial year. Okay, thank you.
And just jumping to here, these are the returns from the money invested into the Mercer funds since January. Pretty consistent. The only variation being January, you'll see, is lower. That's because it was a part month. The money came in during January. But performance has been in line with the market expectations, market benchmark.
Thanks, Brian. Carry on.
Yeah. In the interest of time, I just want to briefly touch on SRI and ethical investment. I realise that's something that's evolved in this committee and in the council over the months while you've been on board the investment managers. So really, we have an SRI fund which has these exclusions in it, and these map quite closely to the exclusions that you communicated to us. That being the tobacco and controversial weapons, which are pretty standard in the industry, and you would expect those in all funds. And then the non-standard, but sort of what we would call more ethical exclusions, being alcohol, which is one that you communicated to us, and fossil fuels. So that's what has put you into the SRI portfolio. And then on top of those, because these exclusions tend to go in line with market best practice globally. So there tends to be a trend when wholesale investors want to take that next step in terms of ethical exclusions, we've created a portfolio that reflects the market best practice, and that includes adult entertainment and gambling. The way that we implement those is quite important, especially for a council like yours, where essentially you want to avoid the headline risk of finding out after the fact that something that you have excluded in your policy has snuck in to one of the managers. We have a very, very robust framework, and our infrastructure with our managers allows us to put screens in ahead of time, so we don't look at the holdings after the fact. We actually have individual mandates with every manager in this portfolio, and we can instruct them to screen all of these companies before they hold them. So you reduce the risk of finding out that you hit the papers for the wrong reasons at some point.
And I'll just make one last point is we sort of see the SRI funds, socially responsible investment funds that you're in as kind of the leading edge, because it's not just about exclusions. Exclusions is about not investing in things that you consider do harm, but is the second part, which is impact investing, which is proactively investing in areas that have a positive social impact. And 1/3 of the allocation to global shares in the funds is allocated to 2 fund managers who invest solely in these types of themes, which make an impact in the communities they invest in. So they're looking for a strong return, but within those parameters. And an example for one of the fund managers is invested in a company in Japan, which makes buildings out of recycled materials. Another is invested in a financing company in India, whose target is to get, I think it's 350,000 first home buyers in India into homes. And that element of it is that second stage of socially responsible investing. It's not just exclusions, which is not doing harm, but it's proactively doing good. And that's the funds you're in. So those are the points we wanted to make. I think we're pretty close to the 10 minutes.
We'll feel good now. Is there any questions from Councillor Barker?
No, just I know that there's a tendency for people who want to delve into these things and to make decisions about it, but I'll overcome my resistance and say, are you investing in rare metals? Seems to be the ones, the minerals, they seem to be the big all-go at the moment. Seems to be money to be made here.
We have exposure in a commodities fund which sits within the real assets, so the answer is yes, but it's not something that I would report back as it being a significant tactical position.
What about Disney, Nike?
Lots of things that
Google?
Oh, the big ones.
Yeah, look.
We're going to get a list of them or not?
Actually, just one point. I'm not sure if it's one worth making about the way we approach the funds. In response to the Christchurch attacks, one of the things that Mesa did, along with every other investor in New Zealand, is excluded, funds holdings in manufacturers or distributors of semi-automatic weapons. But by the same token, Mercer New Zealand signed up to the Christchurch call to put pressure on social media companies to be far more vigilant in terms of the promotion of, of objectionable material. But in the same token, globally, Mercer joined that call. So instead of the 7 billion that we hold on behalf of our clients in New Zealand, it was 350 billion that signed up immediately to that to give greater credibility to the New Zealand call to make that, put that pressure.
Look, thank you. I'm sure there are no other questions coming. Is there one?
Thank you, Chair. Just a very brief one to Jessica. You've resolved the issue with the fund managers about the timeliness of their flow of information so that we can get the reports on time?
Yeah, so there was a little bit, this was the first quarterly report, and in terms of the way that Mercer, the fund, operates, it was a little bit incompatible with the Treasury Report in terms of the template, so we have resolved those issues.
Excellent, thank you.
Look, thank you very much.
Thank you.
That was a very good report. We enjoyed that. And we look forward to seeing you next time, which is, 3 months' time, is that
very
correct? Yes.
If Council, it would be good to get an indication from this
Sure,
committee
we'll
whether they would like to
Yeah,
hear
we'll
from
just
the
see how we go
Okay.
later today and
Sure.
just get back to you and
Honestly,
let you know.
we need longer than 10 minutes. These guys have flown in and given up quite significant time, and we need to do it justice.
Maybe 6 months.
Maybe what we could also do is, look, if you have any questions, and I'm conscious I haven't completely answered your question, just jot them down, pass them through to us. We'll come back to you with notes, a report on that, so that any particular issues that any particular person wants to delve into, we can give you the detail without eating up the time that we have here.
Yeah, that's a very good idea.
Okay, that's cool.
Just make 2 observations, Chair. given we've talked about global warming and flying, whatever, why can't we have these people video conference into us rather than fly down?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And to live, to walk the walk rather than just do the talk.
Yeah, that would
The
be a
second
really
thing
good
I
idea.
make an observation while I'm in a critical phase is thank goodness you gave me the papers the other day, because I've gone to my thing and read them. But part of it is illegible. You're supposed to do all out. So if someone hacks into the system, they won't be able to read the numbers. I was very security conscious.
In the report?
Yeah, on the report we're discussing here, on my iPad, and I pull it up, it's just impossible to read the numbers. I thought, this is very secure.
That's just for your iPad.
It was after.
I had my glasses on too.
I think you had 5 glasses of wine at that point.
No, it's on, I had the thing, the written paper, I got that, it was readable.
Thanks, guys. I think video conferencing is a good idea, though.
All right, look, we'll adjourn for morning tea.
Got your other guests out
and,
there too.
They're happy to join us for a cup of tea. if
You're
you're happy
welcome
to do that.
to stay for a cup of tea.
Oh, thank you very much.
An ethical cup of tea.
$3.50. We just fine.
So we'll do first after.